The Pacific was still black when the instructors blew the first whistle. Wind off the water cut through the line of recruits like razors. 50 trainees stood ankle-deep in surf, rifles held overhead, teeth clenched against the cold. To most, it was another morning in Hell Week. To Elena Voss, it was the start of something she refused to name as failure. "Move!" Chief Morgan barked. "You want that trident? Earn it!" They ran. Sand sucked at their boots, waves clawed at their knees, salt stung their eyes. Voss pushed forward until the obstacle course rose out of the fog, towers, ropes, walls, and the crawl trench glistening with seawater. She dropped to her belly without hesitation. The mud swallowed her forearms as she pulled forward inch by inch. Halfway through, her boot snagged on a buried cable. She twisted, yanked, too hard. Her rifle slipped from her grasp and hit the trench floor with a splash, loud enough to make heads turn. "Candidate Voss!" Morgan's voice cut through the morning. "You just killed your whole team!" She scrambled for the weapon, caked it with mud, and tried to keep moving. Laughter rippled down the line. Even the other candidates couldn't help it. Someone muttered, "Weak hands!" Morgan stopped beside her, crouching just close enough for his voice to slice through the noise. "Quit risk," he said flatly. "Weak doesn't make it past Wednesday." Voss met his eyes for a fraction of a second. Her lips parted, but no words came. She picked up her rifle and finished the crawl. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, 3 recruits had already rung out. The brass bell at the edge of the beach clanged through the fog like a slow verdict. Voss rinsed her rifle, wiped the mud from the trigger guard, and stood in formation. Her knees trembled, but her voice stayed steady during roll call. That night in the barracks, the whispers began. "She's next," someone said, low enough to think she couldn't hear. "Dropped her weapon. She's done." Should have stuck to admin training. Voss lay on her bunk, eyes open, listening to the creak of bed frames and the distant crash of waves. Her roommate, an older recruit named Lane, turned away from her and said nothing. The silence felt heavier than the ridicule. In her locker sat the only personal item she'd kept, a folded letter from her father, written years before he died in a Navy diving accident. The ink had faded, but the line she remembered most was clear in her mind. "Still water cuts deepest." She read it once silently, then folded it again and slid it back into its place. The barracks lights clicked off. She didn't sleep. By morning, her hands had blistered from carrying the rubber boat through the dunes. The instructors shouted orders with the rhythm of gunfire. Sweat burned her eyes, but her breathing stayed even. When Chief Morgan called for push-ups, she locked her arms straight, body rigid as steel. "Look at that," someone jeered. "She thinks she's a statue." The recruit beside her laughed, slipped, and face-planted into the sand. Morgan's boot landed beside Voss's shoulder. "Statues don't bleed," he said. "No, Chief," she answered. He waited for a sign of anger. He got nothing, just focus. During the midday rations break, the men huddled around the benches, trading stories to keep spirits up. Voss sat apart, cleaning her rifle piece by piece, motion precise and silent. Her fingertips were raw, nails cracked, but her movements never shook. Every part she reassembled clicked exactly once, no fumble, no second try. Across the yard, a pair of instructors stood by the fence, watching. One of them, Chief Raines, a broad-shouldered veteran with a map of old scars across his neck, squinted at her. "Quiet one," he said. Morgan shrugged. "She won't last. Too calm. You can't teach fight into still water." Raines didn't answer. He just kept watching. The next test was the log carry. 6 candidates to a log, sprinting up and down the dunes while instructors screamed cadence. The sun burned through the fog now, and the sand reflected the heat like an oven. Voss ended up on the smallest team, 5 men and her, each convinced she would slow them down. "Keep up or drop out," the man behind her growled. She didn't respond. They lifted. Sand slid under their boots as they climbed. By the second hill, her shoulders screamed. By the third, one man dropped out, gasping. The log tilted. Voss shifted her grip and bore the extra weight without breaking stride. The rest followed, startled that the line hadn't collapsed. At the top of the last hill, Morgan's whistle blew. "Set it down!" The log hit the sand with a thud. Everyone bent double, panting. Voss straightened slowly, arms shaking. One of the men glanced over. "How the hell are you still upright?" She shrugged. "Rhythm." He stared. "What?" "Breathing has a rhythm. So does pain." He looked away, confused but unwilling to laugh again. That evening, the recruits ate in silence, too exhausted to trade insults. Voss sat near the end of the table, sipping water. Her hands trembled slightly until she wrapped them around the cup. Across the hall, Chief Rains approached. "Candidate Voss." She stood instantly. "Chief." He motioned for her to relax. "You don't talk much." "Not unless it helps." He studied her for a long moment. "Most here think loud means strong." She met his gaze. "Loud burns out fast." Rains smiled faintly and nodded. "Keep your rhythm, candidate." Then he left her standing among half-empty trays and tired recruits. After chow, she walked alone to the shoreline. The tide was low, the air sharp with salt and diesel. She knelt, scooped a handful of water, and let it run through her fingers. Each droplet caught the last light of sunset. Somewhere behind her, the bell clanged again, another quit risk gone. She whispered, barely audible, "Still here." The wind carried the words away. Later, in her bunk, she opened her training log and wrote a single word in neat block letters: "Endure." She closed the book, placed it under her pillow, and listened to the steady hum of generators outside. Around her, the other recruits groaned in their sleep or muttered through nightmares. Voss lay perfectly still, muscles locked in quiet rebellion against fatigue. She could feel the ache in her shoulders where the log had pressed, the sting in, her palms where rope had bitten through skin. But beneath the pain was something different. Steady, deliberate focus. At 0300, the lights snapped on again. Another whistle, another round of punishment drills for the team that had lost its log bearer. Voss was part of that team, though not at fault. No complaints came from her. She ran, crawled, and carried through the dark until dawn broke gray over the beach. By the final whistle, Chief Morgan's voice had lost some of its bite. He looked over the exhausted line of candidates, eyes pausing briefly on her. Mud streaked her face, but her gaze was clear, unwavering. He didn't say it aloud, but something in his expression shifted. Slight recognition, the kind that comes when defiance survives logic. When the line was dismissed, Rains approached Morgan again. "She didn't flinch," he said. Morgan grunted. "Nobody's flinching this week." "No," Rains said quietly. "She's not flinching on the inside either." As the recruits trudged back to the barracks, Voss walked a half-step behind, boots leaving precise prints in the wet sand. The others staggered, swayed, joked weakly about quitting. She kept her pace even, eyes on the horizon where the sea met the sky, a line straight and unbroken. For the first time since training began, Chief Rains wrote her name in his notebook beside two words: "Watch closely." And when the sun rose over Coronado that morning, it caught the edge of her rifle barrel like a promise. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She just lifted it to her shoulder, steady as if the ocean itself had found balance in her hands. The base buzzed back to life, whistles screaming, instructors shouting. The sound swallowed her again, but this time it didn't shake her, because silence wasn't her weakness anymore. It was the shape of her strength, waiting to be seen. The sun rose pale and cold over the bay, the color of steel scraped clean. The wind carried the scent of salt, oil, and sweat across the parade grounds. Elena Voss stood in formation, uniform damp from the early swim, muscles locked against the ache left from the previous night's punishment drills. Chief Morgan's whistle cut through the air. "Pair up for cold water endurance. Two per line!" The recruits shuffled into place. Voss ended up beside Hobbs, a loud-mouthed ex-college linebacker who'd spent every break reminding her that she didn't belong here. He grinned like a man about to prove a point. "Try not to drown, sunshine," he said. She adjusted her breathing mask without looking at him. "Stay close enough to learn something," he snorted. "From you?" Before she could answer, Morgan's voice boomed. "Into the surf! Move!" They ran. The ocean was a wall of cold that stole breath and thought in one strike. Voss plunged forward, kicking through the current, her strokes controlled, precise. Hobbs powered ahead for the first 50 meters, thrashing through the chop like he could outmuscle the Pacific. When the tide shifted, his rhythm broke. The undertow caught him. He flailed once, twice, panic flashing across his face. "Rope line!" Morgan shouted from the pier. Voss didn't wait. She turned into the current, cutting diagonally across the drift, her strokes steady. By the time the safety line reached him, she was already there, guiding his shoulder back toward the buoy. "Candidate Voss, pull clear." She obeyed instantly, surfaced beside him, and waited while the instructors hauled him in. Her breathing was slow, methodical, heart rate barely elevated. On shore, Hobbs sat shivering, humiliated. Morgan wrapped a towel around him and looked at her. "Why didn't you signal distress?" She answered simply, "I wasn't in distress, Chief." Raines, observing from the pier, raised an eyebrow. "You know you just passed a live reflex test, right?" Voss nodded once. Wasn't trying to. By afternoon, the base had turned into a furnace. The recruits were ordered to the combat pool for underwater navigation drills. Each candidate had to find 5 submerged markers with minimal air supply. The instructors watched through the glass observation panels below the surface. One by one, the trainees went down. Each came up gasping before the final marker. Voss entered last. She slid beneath the water like a knife, her motions efficient, every kick measured. The stopwatch ticked past 1 minute, then 2. At 2:40, she surfaced quietly, mask intact, markers in hand. Morgan checked his timer. 2:41. "You've got lungs like a seal." Raines looked at the chart. "Control, not size." Voss toweled off and moved back into formation. No grin, no triumph. That evening, barracks chatter reached its loudest. The story of Hobbs's near drowning spread faster than truth. "She saved his life," someone said. "She just wanted attention," another replied. "She's dangerous. Doesn't know limits." Voss sat on her bunk, silent, cleaning her rifle. Lane, her roommate, hesitated before speaking. "You could have let the instructors handle him." "I was closer," Voss said. "That's not the point. It is to him." Lane shook her head. "You keep doing that, jumping in when you shouldn't. You'll burn out." Voss looked up, calm. "I don't burn. I adapt." The room went quiet. Even the air conditioner's hum seemed to pause. Later that night, Raines found her alone on the outdoor range. She was timing her trigger pulls by stopwatch, breathing in for 3 counts, exhaling for 2. The shots landed in a perfect line. He stood behind her without announcing himself. "You don't yell. You don't shake. You don't celebrate. That worry you at all?" "No, Chief. Most people in this program fail from the neck up, not the knees down." "You look like you're somewhere else." She lowered the rifle and looked at him. "Somewhere quieter." He studied her face, then reached into his pocket and handed her a small laminated card, worn soft around the edges. The ink read, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." "That was my instructor's mantra," Raines said. "He used to tell us. Control doesn't win crowds, but it wins wars." Voss traced the letters once with her thumb, then nodded. "I'll keep it." The next morning, fog smothered the coastline. The recruits marched toward the obstacle compound, their boots sinking into wet earth. The air smelled of diesel and salt. Morgan pointed toward the wooden walls. "Partner climbs. If your partner fails, you both restart." Voss and Hobbs were paired again. His eyes flickered, resentment mixed with shame. "Don't go soft on me," he muttered. "I wasn't planning to." They sprinted toward the first wall. Hobbs slipped on the second plank. Voss crouched, interlaced her fingers, and boosted him up. He hesitated at the top, glancing down. She climbed after him, cleared the obstacle, and dropped silently to the ground. By the end of the drill, they had completed the course twice without penalty. Hobbs collapsed on the sand, panting. "You ever get tired?" Voss shook her head. "Not when there's rhythm," he frowned. "You and that rhythm thing again. It keeps me even when everything else isn't." He didn't answer. But for the first time, he didn't smirk either. When lights went out, the barracks were quieter. Most had already learned not to provoke her calm. It reflected them too clearly. She sat by her locker, unfolding a piece of driftwood she'd picked up during the morning run. It was carved naturally by the tide into the shape of an arrowhead. She set it beside her compass, symbols of patience and direction. Outside, rain started. She watched the droplets hit the window, forming patterns like Morse code on the glass. Somewhere deep in the compound, the bell rang again. "Another dropout," she whispered under her breath, "still here." 2 days later came the stress chamber test, sound, heat, and psychological overload. The recruits were sealed inside a container while speakers blasted chaos at deafening volume, screaming, alarms, gunfire. The point was simple: measure composure under confusion. Hobbs lasted 6 minutes before pounding the exit signal. Lane followed at 9. Voss stayed until the timer hit 15, then calmly removed her mask and walked out when ordered. Her pulse stayed within range. The evaluators exchanged looks. Raines reviewed the data. Heart rate average 62. No hyperventilation. No spikes. Morgan leaned forward. "You think she's suppressing?" "No," Raines said. "She's redirecting." That evening, during chow, Hobbs sat across from her. "You made me look bad in that tank," he said. "You did that yourself," she replied evenly. He stared at her, then laughed under his breath. "You know, they say SEALs don't flinch under fire. I used to think that was just a saying. Now you don't?" He shook his head. "Now I'm wondering what it costs." She didn't answer. The silence was enough. By lights out, the rumor mill had changed tone. Nobody called her weak anymore. Some called her ghost. Others said she had ice in her blood. She ignored all of it. Before turning in, she unfolded Raines's mantra card and read it one last time. Then she wrote in her logbook, Day 12. "Control holds longer than fear." She closed the book, slid it under her pillow, and exhaled. Across the corridor, Chief Raines filed her daily assessment. Under disposition, he wrote, "Candidate maintains exceptional restraint under continuous provocation," recommending inclusion in advanced reflex evaluation. He capped his pen, looked out at the dark parade field, and muttered to himself, "She's not surviving the program. She's studying it." Outside, the Pacific whispered against the shore. The lights of the training towers reflected off the water in long silver ribbons. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the wind carried the faint clang of the bell again. Another name gone, another silence left behind. But this silence was hers. Controlled, deliberate, unbroken. And for the first time, the instructors began to understand that Elena Voss wasn't holding back out of fear. She was pacing herself for precision. The storm came in low and hard off the Pacific, flattening the horizon into a gray wall of water. The instructors called it perfect weather, nature's final filter. The recruits called it something else entirely. It was the last trial before names would be submitted for review, and the ocean looked eager to collect its due. By dusk, the air reeked of salt and diesel from the rescue boats idling offshore. Searchlights cut white scars across the waves. Chief Morgan stood on the pier shouting through the wind, his voice carried and shredded by the gusts. "Tonight you earn the title or you quit pretending you want it. Simulation Bravo, night rescue under live current conditions. Pair assignments are posted." The roster snapped in the wind against the post. Elena Voss scanned the list and found her name beside Hobbs. He gave a short exhale that sounded like both relief and regret. "Guess we're back to dying together," he muttered. She tied her line to her harness without a word. Chief Raines walked past, checking each connection. When he reached her, he paused. "You steady?" Voss nodded. He handed her a small waterproof comm patch. Keep your mic on channel 2. No hero dives. You follow the current, not your ego. Yes, Chief. Good. He leaned closer, voice almost drowned by the wind. Remember the rhythm. She tapped the laminated card tucked inside her sleeve pocket. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Rains stepped back and raised his fist. Deploy! The first step into the surf felt like being punched by the sea itself. The cold hit her lungs, stealing breath and sound. She forced herself to count. 1, 2, 3, breathe. The light on her harness flickered as she waded deeper, guiding Hobbs behind her. The water rose to their chests, then their shoulders. Marker line bearing west. Morgan shouted from the pier. Target is 10 meters past the red buoy. Voss squinted through the rain. The buoy light blinked faintly between waves. On me! She called through the mic. They swam in bursts, sinking their strokes. Hobbs was strong but inefficient, splashing more than propelling. She slowed her rhythm to keep him aligned. Waves slammed across them, pushing sideways. Voss, Hobbs gasped. You see that light? Not yet. A lightning flash revealed it, the shape of a dummy rescue victim drifting near a capsized raft. The current dragged it east fast. Got visual, she said. Confirm, Raines's voice answered from the tower feed. She adjusted course and pushed through the chop, each stroke a calculation. Angle with the current, not against it. The water around the target boiled with debris, foam, rope, splintered wood. She reached for the dummy's harness. The surge yanked it under before her glove made contact. Without thinking, she dove. For 5 seconds, there was no world but darkness and soundless pressure. Then her hand brushed nylon straps. She locked on, kicked twice, and broke surface with the dummy in tow. Hobbs had lost sight of her and was spinning in place, calling her name. On your left, she shouted. He turned, eyes wide, and swam toward her. Together, they clipped the dummy's harness to the retrieval line. Tower. Package secured, she reported. Voice even. Copy. Return path green, came Raines's calm reply. But the ocean had other plans. The current reversed without warning, pulling them back toward open water. The retrieval line snapped taut, then went slack. The buoy disappeared. Lines cut, Hobbs yelled. Panic cracked his voice. Calm down, Voss said, already scanning for orientation lights. The sky had turned into a seamless sheet of rain. Every direction looked the same. She tapped her wrist compass, shielding it from spray. Bearing east by southeast. Follow my marker. He didn't move. We're off course! I know. She caught his shoulder and forced eye contact. Breathe in. Count 3. Breathe out. Move. Something in her tone steadied him. He nodded and fell in beside her. They swam hard for another minute before she spotted a faint blue glow, one of the perimeter lamps on the far side of the training zone. She raised her comm. Tower, visual on boundary light. Request bearing check. Static answered, then Raines's voice cut through. You're 200 meters south of grid. Hold course. Stay low. Waves peaking at 5. Copy. The next crest hit like a wall. Hobbs vanished under it. Voss dove instantly, caught his harness strap, and dragged him back to surface. He coughed water, sputtering. Don't stop, she said. His voice shook. You're insane. Efficient, she corrected. They made it to the marker buoy 7 minutes later. When her boots touched sand again, the rest of the team was still in the water. She helped Hobbs up the ramp. The moment her line detached, her legs started to shake. Not from cold, but release. Raines met them at the edge, soaked to the bone, headset around his neck. Vitals? Normal, she said. Hobbs looked at her like he couldn't decide if she was human. She didn't even breathe hard. Raines noted something on his clipboard. Reflex within control threshold. Pulse 54. Noted. Morgan frowned. You think that's normal? No, Raines said quietly. It's earned. Inside the debrief tent, the storm battered the canvas like fists. Steam rose from soaked uniforms. The air stank of salt and adrenaline. Morgan paced before the group. Half of you lost orientation. Some panicked, some quit. 2 rescues succeeded. One of them was Voss and Hobbs. Explain, candidate. Voss stood. We didn't fight the water. We used it, Morgan scowled. You sound like a brochure. It's true. Raines said, stepping forward. They kept rhythm. The logs show her heart rate never spiked. Morgan shot him a look. So she's a machine? Raines smiled faintly. No, she's what we keep saying we want. Composed under chaos, the recruits watched in silence. The storm hammered harder, thunder rolling over the compound. Morgan turned back to her. You know, most people freeze out there. I used to, Voss said. What changed? She glanced at the laminated card pinned to her sleeve. I stopped trying to beat the ocean. Started listening instead. Later, after chow, the storm finally broke. The air smelled clean again, washed raw. Voss sat on the pier's edge, boots off, feet dangling above black water. Raines joined her, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed her one. Chiefs aren't supposed to play favorites, she said. He shrugged. Good thing I'm not playing. Just watching evolution happen. They sat in quiet for a long time, listening to the surf slap against pylons. You scared out there? He asked eventually. Only before it started, she said. He nodded. That's the right kind. The kind that teaches. After a moment, he stood. Get some rest. Graduation's in 48 hours. As he turned to go, she called after him. Chief? He looked back. Thanks for the card. Keep it, he said. Looks like you understood the last line, she frowned. There was a last line? He smiled. Flip it over. When he was gone, she pulled the card from her sleeve. The back, faint and water-worn, read, Control outlasts fear. She held it until the wind dried it, then folded it carefully into her logbook beside her father's letter. By midnight, the base had gone silent except for generators and distant thunder. The other recruits were asleep. Voss sat at her desk writing by flashlight. Day 18. The ocean doesn't take orders. It takes measure. She closed the notebook and looked out the window. The water was calm now, black as glass, reflecting the floodlights of the pier. For the first time since she'd arrived, the reflection looked steady, not because the waves were gone, but because she'd learned how to move with them. Out beyond the breakers, the training buoys blinked faintly in rhythm like a slow heartbeat. She breathed with it, counting the seconds between flashes. Slow, smooth, steady. The storm had tested every part of her, muscle, nerve, patience. But it hadn't broken her rhythm. It had confirmed it. And when dawn crept back over the horizon, turning the water silver again, Chief Raines would find her name already circled at the top of the qualification list, underlined once, not for speed, not for strength, for control. Morning arrived with a rare stillness over Coronado. The ocean was calm, its surface glinting like metal under the first light. The storm that had punished them for days had finally moved east, leaving the base washed clean. The smell of wet asphalt and seaweed hung in the air. For the first time in weeks, silence didn't feel like pressure. It felt earned. Elena Voss stood in front of her locker, methodically polishing her boots. Every motion precise, practiced, and deliberate. Around her, recruits scrambled to press uniforms, fix creases, and clear last-minute inspections. The atmosphere buzzed with nervous energy, but she moved as if time belonged to her. Chief Raines appeared at the doorway, clipboard under one arm, a rare half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Inspection line in 5. You ready? She straightened, slipping on her jacket. Always, Chief. He gave a brief nod. Let's make this official. On the parade field, rows of candidates stood at rigid attention. The air shimmered slightly from the rising heat. Flags snapped in a steady wind, their colors sharp against the pale sky. The brass band tuned in low hums near the reviewing stand where senior officers waited, faces impassive behind mirrored sunglasses. Chief Morgan paced down the line of graduates, checking details with the scrutiny of a sniper. When he reached Voss, he stopped. His shadow crossed her boots. Candidate Voss. Chief, she replied, voice clear but calm. He examined her uniform, spotless, her posture unshakable. I thought you'd ring out the first week. You weren't the only one, she said quietly. For a heartbeat, the hint of respect softened his eyes. Then he moved on without another word. Raines took his place beside Commander Pierce at the podium. The commander began the address, voice measured and ceremonial. Each of you standing here has been broken, rebuilt, and tested beyond your limits. This program does not create strength. It reveals it. He paused, scanning the formation. When this began, you were a list of names. Today you are something more, proof that discipline outlasts endurance. The band struck a single note. The roll call began. Candidate Adams. Here, sir. Candidate Hobbs. Here, sir. Candidate Voss. Her answer cut through the wind, steady, grounded. Here, sir. Rain stepped forward with the final roster. The commander unfolded it, reading slowly for effect. Top of graduating class, Candidate Elena Voss. The sound that followed wasn't the usual roar of applause. It was a ripple of stunned quiet, as if the air itself took a moment to absorb the statement. Then, gradually, the recruits broke into clapping. Even Morgan joined. One deliberate strike of palm against palm. Voss remained still until the commander beckoned her forward. She marched to the platform, boots echoing sharply across the deck. The sun caught the brass buttons of her jacket, throwing faint reflections across the assembled ranks. At the podium, Rains held the Navy SEAL trident in one hand. It gleamed under the light, simple, heavy, symbolic. For control under chaos, he said softly, pinning it to her chest. He leaned closer so only she could hear. Still think silence means weakness? She looked up, eyes clear, voice low but certain. Silence only means I'm ready. Rains nodded once, a smile ghosting across his face. That's the line they'll remember. After the ceremony, the recruits gathered by the bleachers, trading congratulations and photographs. Hobbs approached her, uniform damp with sweat, a sheepish grin under his cap. Guess I owe you more than an apology, he said. You owe yourself more control, she replied, but her tone wasn't harsh. He laughed quietly. Fair, I'll work on it. She extended her hand. See that you do. He took it firm grip, then saluted. It wasn't mockery this time, it was acknowledgement. Rains joined her as the crowd thinned. You did it, he said simply. She tilted her head. Did what? Changed the way they look at quiet. She gave a faint smile. That wasn't my goal. Good, he said. The ones who deserve respect never chase it. They just keep earning it until people notice. They stood side by side, watching the younger recruits file out of the stands, their chatter full of plans and relief. The next generation already buzzing in the distance. Command's recommending you for instructor rotation, he added after a moment. Behavioral conditioning and reflex protocol. Her brow lifted slightly. Teaching? Correction, he said. You'll be shaping discipline, not just demonstrating it. Voss didn't answer right away. The idea hung between them like a challenge. Then she nodded once. Understood. That evening, as the base settled back into routine, she found herself walking the shoreline alone. The water was mirror flat now, the same surface that had nearly swallowed her days before. She stopped near the pier and pulled from her pocket the small brass compass she'd carried through training. The metal had dulled, edges roughened by salt and time. She turned it over in her palm, thumb tracing the faint engraving, EV, her father's initials. Not hers. I made it, Dad, she said under her breath. A gull cried overhead. The tide rolled in, tugging at her boots. She crouched and placed the compass on the wet sand, letting the waves reach it, then retreat. For a long time she watched as the tide slowly covered it, burying the weight she no longer needed. Behind her, the distant sound of the bell echoed once across the compound. It wasn't the toll of someone quitting this time. It was maintenance testing the system. But it still sent a ripple through her chest, a reminder of every name that hadn't made it. She whispered, "Still here," one final time and turned away. In the command office, Rains reviewed the final evaluations. Chief Morgan stood across from him, arms folded. Didn't think she'd finish, Morgan admitted. Didn't think she'd last a week. Rains looked up from the papers. You were half right. She didn't last a week, she outgrew it. Morgan huffed, part laugh, part surrender. We could use more like her. Then start looking for the ones who don't yell, Rains said. Morgan nodded. Lesson learned. Before lights out, Voss returned to her quarters. Her locker was nearly empty now, just her folded fatigues, the laminated mantra card, and her logbook. She opened to the last page. The ink from earlier entries had faded from sweat and seawater, but her handwriting remained firm. Day 20. Discipline isn't silence. It's preparation. She closed the cover and placed the card on top. The front still read, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." The back, "Control outlasts fear." She slipped both items into an envelope and sealed it. On the front she wrote, "For the next one who thinks she's not enough." Then she slid it under the door of the recruit's dorm before walking out into the hall. Outside, the moon hung low, reflecting off the training pool's still surface. The floodlights painted everything silver and quiet. Voss stood for a moment, breathing in the salt air, the distant hum of generators, the steady rhythm of the waves. In a few hours, she would report for reassignment, this time not as a candidate, but as an instructor. A new cycle of recruits would arrive, wide-eyed and loud, mistaking noise for confidence. She smiled faintly. They'd learn soon enough. As she turned toward the barracks, a voice called from behind. It was Hobbs. "Commander Voss!" She paused. "Not yet. Soon," he said. She nodded once, accepting it without pride, without disbelief. Just fact. When she finally walked into the darkness, the last thing the night caught was the faint glint of her trident pin catching moonlight, a flash of quiet authority moving through shadow, and across the sleeping base. Silence followed her like respect finally earned.